In the polished world of Hollywood, Ron Howard is widely regarded as the ultimate nice guy. Known to the public as the polite child actor and the steady, reliable director, Howard's 6-decade-long career proves that staying at the top requires more than kindness. It demands resilience and a thick skin. Behind his affable smile lies a history of navigating difficult sets and clashing egos. Howard didn't merely witness greatness, he endured it. Over the years, certain actors tested his patience and revealed to him the sharpest edges of the industry. Frances Bavier, the mask of the matriarch for millions of Americans watching the Andy Griffith Show in the 1960s, Frances Bavier embodied domestic warmth. As Aunt Bee, she was the heart of Mayberry, concerned with pickles, pies, and the safety of her nephew Opie. Yet, for young Ron Howard, working with Bavier was an early lesson in the gap between public image and private reality. While audiences saw a caring aunt, the cast and crew encountered a classically trained New York stage actress who carried herself with a cold, professional disdain. Bavier viewed herself as a serious dramatic artist trapped in a medium she considered beneath her. This created subtle but persistent friction on set, a quiet evil of emotional distance that Howard, as a child actor, was acutely sensitive to. In a town built on communal warmth, Bavier was an island of austerity. She didn't want to remain Aunt Bee off camera. She demanded respect and resented being tied to a small-town sitcom. To Howard, she became the archetype of professional disdain. Not explosive diva behavior, but the slow, simmering resentment of someone who felt overqualified for her role. Howard has written in his memoir The Boys and shared in interviews that Bavier disapproved of the playful antics of Andy Griffith and Don Knotts. While the men ad-libbed and laughed freely, Bavier remained rigid. Howard, learning from adults around him, absorbed contrasting lessons: leadership and humor from Griffith and caution from Bavier. Realizing that the friendly face in a script might be the one to ignore you at the craft services table. The tension was tangible. Bavier reportedly once swung an umbrella at Jim Nabors because his singing irritated her. For young Ronnie Howard, this was a confusing introduction to the mask of Hollywood. He learned early that performing warmth and chemistry on-screen often required sheer determination, not genuine affection. Bavier's coldness reflected a golden age ethos. Acting was sacred, serious, and not to be trivialized by sitcom antics. Despite her decades of stage experience, she would forever be remembered for a role she privately despised. As the show progressed, Bavier retreated further into isolation. Eventually, she retired to North Carolina, avoiding many reunions cherished by Howard and Griffith. Howard has described her with a mix of pity and respect, acknowledging that her unhappiness made her difficult, but her professionalism made her a true artist. From navigating her temperament, Howard absorbed an essential Hollywood truth: the character is often a lie. One can craft genuine warmth on screen while standing amid a room full of indifference. Bavier was his first encounter with the Golden Age ghost, an actor haunted by roles they feel they should have played. Yul Brynner, the tyranny of the icon. While Bavier represented the quiet, internalized resentment of a fading era, Yul Brynner was its fiery opposite, a blazing, external force demanding that everyone in the room orbit around him. Howard met Brynner on the set of the 1959 film The Journey. At just 5 years old, he found himself in the presence of a man who didn't merely play kings. He acted as one. Known for his shaved head and commanding voice in The King and I, Brynner radiated an authority that left no room for a child's presence. This was Howard's first encounter with the divine right of kings archetype, the star as absolute sovereign on set. Brynner's intimidating presence was a form of psychological dominance. He moved with rigid precision and intense focus, a stark contrast to Howard's father, Rance Howard, whose guidance was gentle and nurturing. Brynner didn't converse, he issued decrees. He didn't walk, he processed. Young Howard was genuinely frightened by the actor's intensity, whose penetrating gaze reinforced his on-set supremacy. Protected by the studio system, stars like Brynner were treated as untouchable, and he fully embraced this status. Howard observed seasoned crew members scrambling to meet Brynner's exacting standards. If lighting was imperfect, a line flubbed, or the set's energy misaligned with his expectations, Brynner's disapproval reshaped the entire environment. For Howard, this was an early lesson in how a single ego could dominate and disrupt a collective creative process. Brynner was the immovable object, a man whose personal myth outweighed the comfort and collaboration of those around him. The tension between Howard and Brynner wasn't personal. It's unlikely Brynner even considered a 5-year-old a peer worth holding a grudge against. Instead, it stemmed from a fundamental clash of philosophies. Howard was learning the Midwestern approach to work. Be prepared, be kind, and be part of the team. Brynner embodied the continental approach. Be the spectacle, be the mystery, and be the master. Howard recalled that Brynner's presence was so commanding that it felt as though the air left the room when he entered. This wasn't mere stardom. It was a kind of professional tyranny that demanded everyone else subordinate their identity. Brynner also had a legendary drive to control his image. A talented photographer and man of high culture, he often used his interests to create distance from the common folk on set. He avoided small talk and the casual camaraderie that helped young performers feel safe. Instead, he maintained a wall of exoticism, presenting himself as the other, so self-serious that it bordered on the absurd. Even as a child, Howard could sense this wasn't just acting. It was a lifestyle built on curated dominance. Years later, as Howard became a director, Brynner's shadow likely lingered as a cautionary presence. Howard's sets became famously relaxed and egalitarian, a deliberate counter to the emperor model he had observed. He learned that while fear can produce a strong performance, it also creates an environment too fragile for innovation. Brynner demonstrated that the icon can be a cage, not just for those around them, but for the performer as well, who must constantly uphold their own legend. Howard's early experiences with Brynner were a baptism by fire, teaching him that Hollywood wasn't merely a playground, it was a hierarchy. To thrive, one had to learn to hold their ground in the shadow of giants. Brynner personified the Golden Age's darkest trait, the belief that genius grants the right to be untouchable. He was a king without a kingdom, ruling the soundstage with an iron fist, leaving young Howard to wonder if success could be achieved without sacrificing one's humanity. Brynner ruled through presence, but in the 1980s, Howard would face a different type of challenge, the intellectual blockade. While Brynner represented an old-school dominance, Shelley Long embodied a modern, cerebral form of friction. By 1982, Howard had moved beyond the child actor role and was trying to prove himself as a director capable of leading a major feature. The project was Night Shift, a comedy that required a careful balance of chaotic energy and grounded heart. Long was brilliant but also an analytical anchor, whose meticulous process threatened to stall production. Coming from Chicago's Second City, she was trained to dissect performance and character motivation. Whereas Michael Keaton improvised rapidly and Henry Winkler leaned on natural warmth, Long often acted as the brakes. She didn't just want to deliver lines. She needed to understand the exact reasoning behind every choice her character, Belinda, made. For Howard, this was his introduction to star management. Directing a film meant not just calling the shots, but negotiating a daily balance between schedule and a star's obsessive attention to detail. The friction with Long wasn't malicious. It arose from a mismatch in pace. Howard, shaped by the efficiency-driven world of sitcoms, valued momentum. Long treated the set as a laboratory. Industry lore often describes her as not always the easiest to work with, not because of diva behavior, but due to a perfectionism that sometimes overlooked the ensemble. On Night Shift, this manifested in endless questions and repeated takes long after the director was satisfied. Howard learned a crucial lesson in directorial psychology. The analytical anchor isn't malicious, they seek safety. For Long, examining every detail was a shield against failure, but for a director, it could become a wall. Howard had to acknowledge her concerns without letting them drain the film's energy. This was his first encounter with the intellectual blockade, a situation where an actor's intelligence could become a means of control. If they could outthink the director, they could dominate the set. Long's technical habits, which later became famous on Cheers, intensified this tension. Subtle movements forced the camera to linger on her, a quiet form of scene stealing that frustrated co-stars. On Night Shift, this competitive atmosphere clashed with the family vibe Howard sought. He realized that directing wasn't just about cameras, it was about managing the gravitational pull of the stars. Long's orbit was strong, and if Howard didn't remain firm, the whole film could be drawn into her singular focus. Howard's experience with Shelley Long marked a turning point in his leadership style. He realized that being a nice guy wasn't enough, he had to be a clear guy. He learned to set boundaries with performers who confused process with stalling, and he learned to value the result, even when the journey was grueling. Long's performance in Night Shift was brilliant, bringing a vulnerability to Belinda that another actress might have missed. Howard recognized that friction could create brilliance, but the heat of that friction almost destroyed the machine. Looking back, his clash with Shelley Long exemplifies the director's dilemma. How much difficult behavior from a star can you tolerate for the sake of the performance? Long forced Howard to find his voice, showing him that even in a comedy about morgue attendants and love brokers, the real drama lies in the internal psychological battles. She was the first to teach him that the hardest part of directing isn't the lighting or the script. It's managing the human ego disguised as the work. Where Long slowed the gears with questions, the next star ignited them with raw, unpredictable fire. Russell Crowe, the volatile alchemist. If Shelley Long's friction was a slow-motion intellectual grind, Crowe was a lightning strike. By the time Howard cast him in A Beautiful Mind, Crowe was already a legend of the mercurial variety, a man whose physical intensity and hair-trigger temperament matched his Oscar-worthy talent. Howard, the perennial seeker of harmony, was suddenly tasked with directing a volatile alchemist, a performer who believed great art could only be forged under intense pressure. This wasn't a clash of styles, it was a clash of temperaments, the boy next door versus the gladiator. Crowe brought a method-like intensity to the set, often seeking total creative control. He didn't just play John Nash, he inhabited him, expecting the production to bend to the needs of that immersion. Howard recalls that Crowe would ask good, hard questions, a polite term for multi-hour debates over a single line or prop placement. Crowe's intelligence and physical presence dominated the space. On the sets of A Beautiful Mind and Cinderella Man, the tension was palpable. Crowe was notorious for his short fuse, including a famous altercation with a producer at an awards show, and that danger followed him onto the soundstage. Managing him taught Howard the burden of brilliance. With some actors, the challenge isn't a lack of professionalism but an excess of it, a commitment so intense it risks the social fabric of the crew. Howard had to act as a lion tamer, allowing Crowe's genius to roam while protecting the supporting cast and the schedule. Friction here was about boundaries. Crowe would push, and Howard, quietly but firmly, had to push back. It was a high-stakes game over months of filming, with respect as the currency. One notable example was Crowe's insistence on shooting A Beautiful Mind in chronological order, a logistical nightmare, especially on a modest budget. Howard initially resisted, citing the mosaic nature of filmmaking, but Crowe was relentless. He argued that John Nash's psychological decay couldn't be faked by jumping around the timeline. Howard eventually relented, realizing Crowe wasn't being difficult for ego's sake, but for the sake of truth. This became a turning point. With A Volatile Alchemist, you don't fight the fire, you channel it. The psychological toll on Howard was considerable. Unlike his sets with Tom Hanks or Steve Martin, where collaboration was lighthearted, the Crowe sets were heavy with the work. There were days of silence, heated debate, and thick tension from Crowe's dissatisfaction. Howard had to develop a new kind of directorial resilience, absorbing the blows of a leading man's mercurial moods without fracturing. He learned that some actors don't want a nice director. They want a partner as obsessed as they are. This period transformed Howard from a director of movies into a director of performances. By surviving Crowe's fire, he proved he could handle Hollywood's most challenging elements. He recognized that a difficult temperament often shadows immense talent. Crowe pushed Howard out of his comfort zone, forcing him to abandon the safe, Opie persona and become a leader who could command a room with competence and intellectual rigor. Howard and Crowe eventually became friends and collaborators, but the early battles left lasting marks. Crowe taught Howard that conflict can fuel a masterpiece and that the nice guy can only prevail if he is also the strongest in the room. Mastering the Crowe clash earned Howard a reputation as a director who could tame the untamable. Managing genius is a marathon. Managing tragedy is heartbreak. Tom Sizemore, The Lost Highway. While Crowe represented the fire of genius, Sizemore embodied a tragic form of Hollywood friction, the slow collapse of reliability. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Sizemore was a sought-after tough guy, a powerhouse performer who could hold his own alongside Robert De Niro and Tom Hanks. But when he crossed paths with Howard, especially around the era of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, where he had an uncredited role, and other industry circles, he became the poster child for the liability of vice. For Howard, a man who sees a film set as a collaborative family, Sizemore was an introduction to the unpredictable shadow. His evil wasn't a desire to harm the film. but a total abandonment of professional responsibility due to substance abuse. Howard's sets operate on a foundation of Midwestern work ethic. Show up early, know your lines, respect the crew. Sizemore, trapped by addiction, often acted in direct opposition to those values. Ron Howard became a figure of what he called heartbreak friction. Unlike a diva demanding extra trailers or a perfectionist asking for more takes, an actor struggling with addiction creates an entirely different kind of anxiety. Every day on the call sheet, the director isn't wondering if the scene will succeed. They're wondering if the actor will even show up. For Howard, managing a talent like Tom Sizemore was an exercise in the ethics of the industry. How do you safeguard a massive production, one that employs hundreds of people and costs millions, when a key player is unraveling in real time? Howard has often reflected on the sadness of seeing immense talent overshadowed by personal demons. Sizemore became part of a larger Hollywood cautionary tale. A man who had the world at his feet, but was constantly pulled down by his own shadow. This wasn't a clash of egos. It was the collision of the gilded potential of a career with the gritty reality of human frailty. The friction with Sizemore also tested the limits of Howard's nice guy diplomacy. When an actor's personal struggles jeopardize the safety or morale of the set, a director must shift from mentor to protector of the production. Howard learned the hard way that you cannot kindness someone out of a crisis. For a director committed to a supportive environment, this was sobering. Sizemore embodied the evil of wasted time. The hours lost to delays, the creative energy spent managing chaos, and the sense of being held hostage by one person's volatility. Sizemore's presence also highlighted Hollywood's fixer culture. Studios of that era still tried to manage their stars' bad boy reputations through handlers and interventions. Howard found himself in the center of this machinery, trying to coax a performance from a man who was often barely there. This experience taught him about the fragility of the machine. Even the most expensive, professional production can be derailed by the chemical imbalance of a single individual. It made Howard hypervigilant in casting, emphasizing personal character as much as theatrical skill. Looking back, Howard's conflict with Sizemore was less about a specific on-set fight and more about a fundamental difference in values. Howard viewed filmmaking as a privilege, while Sizemore, at his worst, treated it as a burden or distraction from inner turmoil. The friction forced Howard to set boundaries. He could be a nice guy, but not a doormat for chaos. He realized that the greatest good in filmmaking is protecting the collective effort, even if it means distancing yourself from a friend or talent who can no longer be relied upon. Sizemore remains a ghost in Howard's career, a reminder of what happens when Hollywood's gilded cage offers too much money and too little accountability. He was the heartbreak pillar of Howard's experience, a man whose friction didn't just heat the set, it threatened to burn it down entirely. Through Sizemore, Howard learned that the hardest part of directing isn't dealing with actors who fight you. It's dealing with those who aren't present to fight at all. Sometimes, the greatest friction comes not from an enemy, but from a friend whose shadow overshadows your own. Henry Winkler, the paradox of the sidekick. Some of the most complex friction in Howard's career didn't come from an enemy, but from his best friend. On the set of Happy Days, Howard was the undisputed lead, the Richie Cunningham, around whom the 50s nostalgia revolved. But within a few seasons, a cultural phenomenon shifted the spotlight. Henry Winkler's The Fonz didn't just become popular, he became the sun. Howard faced the ultimate test of ego, a situation he called the paradox of the sidekick, where his character remained the moral center, but his professional standing was being eclipsed by a leather-jacketed supporting player. This friction wasn't personal. Howard and Winkler genuinely cared for each other. Winkler was, and remains, the godfather to Howard's children. Yet the evil was structural. Network executives began treating Howard with an unexpected disrespect, even suggesting renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. The insult to Howard's professional standing was enough that he threatened to quit. He wasn't jealous of Winkler. He was protecting his dignity. This was a lesson in the erasure of the lead. How quickly Hollywood discards a reliable workhorse for a flashy star. Howard handled the situation with maturity beyond his years, a phrase Winkler uses to describe the teenage Howard. While the press tried to manufacture a rivalry, Howard focused on the work. He recognized Winkler's brilliance was good for the show, but understood he could no longer remain in a space where he was treated as second class. This friction ultimately propelled his transition to directing. If the network wouldn't respect him as an actor, he would become the one hiring the actors. Years later, Howard and Winkler reflected on this on a podcast. Howard admitted, "It did hurt my feelings," revealing a rare vulnerability. This highlights the most human friction of all, the pain of being overshadowed. Howard's ability to maintain their friendship while navigating professional disappointment stands as a testament to his emotional intelligence. Winkler didn't just provide a sidekick for Richie. He provided the push Howard needed to stop acting and start building his own empire. Howard's journey through Hollywood, from the golden age to New Hollywood, was never easy. From the icy disdain of Francis Bavier to the fiery genius of Russell Crowe, he confronted every form of the Hollywood shadow. But instead of being consumed, he refined his craft. He learned that Hollywood's evil is rarely a villain in black, its insecure egos, addiction, and a fickle marketplace. Today, Ron Howard is one of the most successful directors in history, a man who survived the sharp edges of the industry and developed a style uniquely his own. He proved that you can face the most difficult archetypes in Hollywood and emerge with integrity intact. His record isn't one of grudges, but of lessons learned. Howard saw the darkness behind the curtain and chose to stay in the light. Subscribe to uncover more truths behind the legends. Thanks for watching.